Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we are going to be talking about the newest album from Tim McGraw, titled Sundown, Heaven Town. You know, it's hard as a critic to talk about some of the acts with which you grew up. Now these are the bands that are lodged in your formative psyche, and though you might not have heard any of the songs or any of the albums for years, you still remember every single line as if it was just yesterday. Now despite the fact that I have not listened through a Shania Twain or a Garth Brooks or an Alabama or a Sammy Kershaw album in years, I can still remember many of the songs when they inevitably come up at karaoke. Well, okay, it's mostly the Shania Twain tracks because of every single girls' night out ever, but okay, the point is that I find Come On Over a hard record to judge because, well, I grew up with it. And she dropped 12 goddamn singles off that album thanks to songwriter and future Nickelback producer Mutt Lange. And this is something of a similar issue with Tim McGraw, one of the most popular and successful country acts of all time, thanks to a very quiet, sensitive, middlebrow sensibility and a knack for hiring really good songwriters. Because unlike contemporaries Alan Jackson and George Strait in neo-traditional country, Tim McGraw has been using the Nashville songwriting machine for decades now to make the material that I like to describe as an auditory Xanax, especially around the time of his long-lasting marriage to Faith Hill in the late 90s. Now, the funny thing is that Tim McGraw is a good enough performer with a strong sense of populism, so while he barely ever writes any songs for his albums, they still manage to produce some pretty damn solid singles that did stick in the memory. I'll admit it, I do generally like Tim McGraw as a performer, even if I would never call myself a real fan. But in recent years, Tim McGraw has been in a bit of a complicated situation behind the scenes, and it is definitely shown through in his music as he's really tried to struggle to keep up with the times. Now the larger issue was with his label Curb Records, which milked his name into the ground through a pile of increasingly redundant greatest hits albums that traded off all of his 90s success. Eventually he was able to claw his way out of that contract and move over to Big Machine, a label famous for Taylor Swift, but the artistic flailing on that record was very noticeable. And yeah, sure, Highway Don't Care, it's an okay song, but Truck Yeah was easily the stupidest song he'd ever released, leaving that 2013 album a bit of a mixed bag. And off of the opening single for this album, Looking for That Girl, which features some of the most egregious auto-tune and terrible production that I'd ever heard in a country song, I was pretty concerned for this record. That said, he did manage to return to his comfort zone of middlebrow tracks with Meanwhile Back at Mama's, a duet with Faith Hill that was pretty good all things considered, but not exactly inspiring considering Miranda Lambert made Automatic that covered a lot of the same themes and did it 10 times better this year, so I didn't have any idea what to expect. But I figured, hey, it's Tim McGraw, at the very least my mom would appreciate me doing this review, and I need to improve my YouTube demographics somehow, so I gave Sundown Heaven Town plenty of listens. What'd I get? Well, honestly, pretty much exactly what I expected from Tim McGraw, given his career trajectory over the past few years. A pretty solid, pretty decent album that's good when it plays in Tim McGraw's comfort zone of very neo-traditional country and flies into wildly mixed results whenever he tries to play catch-up with modern trends. It's nothing that's gonna surprise you or thrill you all that much, but then again, it's Tim McGraw, so you're not really going in expecting that. But I don't deny that there are some pretty solid, pretty decent songs on this album that do manage to raise it above average, if only that. So let's start with Tim McGraw himself. And look, there's definitely a reason this guy has stuck around for as long as he has in the mainstream, and that's some real good performing charisma. He might not write any of his own songs, but he works his ass off to sell his material, and he's got the emotional expressiveness to make every single song feel very heartfelt and potent. That's why so many of his slower, more intimate tracks have clicked with listeners for years now. But this album doesn't exactly go in that direction, and while there are a couple of ballads, much more of this album is filled with the heavier, spacey sounding country songs in the vein of the most recent work from Dierks Bentley, Dustin Lynch, and Brad Paisley. And this is where we run into a bit of a problem, because Tim McGraw's voice has really taken a beating over the years. And while those three artists that I mentioned have a bit of a lower range that can fit with that production, Tim McGraw doesn't quite fit in with it as well. It doesn't help when the pitch correction is piled so heavily on, like on the Bro Country Leftover and lead-off single Looking for That Girl, which is just goddamn awful. But even on some of the more organic moments with subtle reverb, songs like Words Are Medicine, Last Turn Home, and Still in the Line, they don't quite feel altogether balanced with Tim McGraw's voice, which is a little bit higher and thinner and doesn't quite work as well. Now, it definitely helps matters that the instrumentation makes up a fair bit for the production. Yeah, okay, there are definitely drum machines and some slicker production that I'd prefer to see on most country tracks, but for the most part, Tim McGraw goes for more texture and rough edges on this album, which is definitely a welcome shift with his music and country music as a whole. The opening track, Overrated, starts off with banjo and gentle, rollicking guitars, with plenty of steel guitar balancing out the rest of the song, and the interplay between them all is great. Shotgun Rider does much of the same, with a very sturdy electric melody anchoring the melody line that I really did like, and it's a sort of neo-traditional country that is such a natural fit for Tim McGraw. And when he sticks to this vein instrumentally, like on the grimy Diamond Rings and Old Bar Stools, which has some great snarl to the electric guitar midway to the back of the mix, the gentle acoustic feel of Meanwhile Back at Mama's, that's got a warmth to the production that's impossible to fake and feels very genuine, and the album standout, Sick of Me, which feels like a mid-90s neo-traditional leftover with great melodies and old-school songwriting cadence and enough guitar heft to make it feel modern. I really dug that song. And yet, even on the tracks where Tim McGraw can't quite match some of the production's weight, I honestly do like the new spacey brand of country that seems to be becoming a little bit more popular in the mainstream. City Lights feels a little bit thin with the synth drifting in at the back of the mix, but Last Turn Home has some solid interplay between the piano and the guitar. Still in the Line has some earnest power, even despite the drum machines and backing vocals, thanks to keeping the acoustic guitars at the very front and combining the heavy crunch of distortion to the chorus midway to the back of the mix in order to balance out with the steel guitars and the synth line. And the quiet, understated power in Portland, Maine matches the lyrics that reflect the real darkness that lurks in the subtext of the song. Now, that being said, the two definite misfires in this album are Dust and Keep On Truckin', mostly thanks to slight mix balance issues for Tim McGraw's vocals and the choice of some really over-polished guitar tones that recall some of the most forgettable bro country that's been released this year. And yeah, of course, there's Looking for That Girl, but I'd prefer not to acknowledge that that song exists at all. It's goddamn awful. Now, this takes us to lyrics, and this is where we run to a bit of a tricky situation, because okay, let's be honest. Tim McGraw, he's 47, and even despite these vocal effects, his age is starting to come through in his voice. And when you have songs that have certain cadences or verses or word choices, the disconnect between Tim McGraw and Tim McGraw's songwriters can unfortunately start to become pretty noticeable, which can be both good and bad. Now, in the best cases, it's the easy acknowledgement that Shane McAnally wrote Overrated because it displays his typical brand of nuance and well-structured metaphors, which you don't normally see in Tim McGraw songs, but it works here. Whereas in other ways, you have Dust, a song that quite literally is about the literal dirt and how it just gets everywhere, and it's so obvious that Rhett Atkins wrote the song this dumb that's not even funny. But it's not just that. City Lights goes for the country boy city girl connection and features the lyric in the chorus, "We got high on the top of that ridge." And look, while that line might have worked for Indian outlaw Tim McGraw 20 years ago, I'm sorry, I just don't buy it now. And this is the issue that you run into whenever you review albums where the artist has no writing credits and other people wrote all the songs for him. And that's how well the song fits with the artist and how well he can sell it. Now, the latter part isn't really much of an issue. Tim McGraw's game, and he's gonna try hard on pretty much everything. But the former becomes a bit of a problem, especially when they stray away from his neo-traditional country zone. Now, take songs like Words Are Medicine, which tries to go for all-encompassing populism, and yet then tries to abruptly change focus and become more personal, and it just falls completely flat for me. Or take the lyric in Keep On Truckin', so your flop don't flip because your hop don't hip. Now look, I don't care if you like or dislike rap music, that just sounds asinine. Now, it's better when the songs take on a more personal scope, and that's what makes songs like The Hidden Nuance and Diamond Rings and Old Bar Stools, or The Quiet Reflection of Meanwhile Back at Mama's, it makes those songs work. And even when playing a Burnout on Sick of Me, Tim McGraw can sell that realization that he needs to pull his shit together. But when he drifts a little bit outside of that, it can get a fair bit shakier. Now, Shotgun Rider, it's a solid enough track, but when contrasted against Portland, Maine, a more ambitious song lyrically where the subtext tells the story of a small town hookup that strongly implies that one or both of them are cheating, and not only does the song come across as rather mean-spirited, but also completely unconvincing, because I've got the fairly strong feeling that Tim McGraw would never do anything that the song suggests. But you know what, to summarize, this album's decent. It's got a few standouts and a few huge low points. Looking for That Girl's awful, and a whole lot of interchangeable but listenable tracks in between. It helps that Tim McGraw is a good enough performer and his melodic construction is solid solid enough to elevate Sundown, Heaventown to just above average, but honestly, I wouldn't call it anything more than that. For me, it's a decent 6 out of 10, and only a recommendation if you're a fan looking for more Tim McGraw, but it's not up to passing any of his best material from the mid to late 90s anytime soon, and at this point of his career, Tim McGraw should honestly just focus on his own lane, and not try to spread himself too thin trying to keep up. After all, relevance in the artistic world comes with quality, not with jumping on trends. And Tim McGraw, he's old enough to know that. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. If there's any other albums coming out recently that you want me to take a look at, or if there's anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. Until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.